So today I'm joined by Dr. Rania Azmi, who is the founder of Alexandrite Decisions, and she's also a member of Wharton's Executive Advisory Boards. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you today, Dr. Azmi, so thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So you recently wrote a blog based on the idea that there'll be a new world order in investment post COVID-19. Can you explain this a bit for us?
Indeed, as I see it from the information, like if you remember, this article was drafted back in April, and the idea was well before that, and now we are in September, 9 months through the virus crisis. My idea is still the same. There will be a new world order, not only in investment, in economic, political, social dynamics, you name it, even in humanitarian causes, because what we see right now, it's not merely about a virus that is threatening the world, it's about the ramifications and implications, how people, countries, politicians, households are reacting and interacting with this crisis. And there are definitely going to be new order in terms of many dynamics. As detailed on that article, I can touch base on some of these dynamics.
And yeah, for our audience watching, we will link to Dr. Azmi's blog that we've recently just mentioned. So secondly, in a bit more detail, you're confident that investments with specifically family offices will change. Can you briefly explain how?
The reason I mentioned family offices is, the industry in the investment world usually compares between institutional investors which are more solid in terms of governance and I would say institutional walls, as opposed to family offices who are historically being more flexible and swift in taking advantage of investment opportunities, but at the same time, they lack some governance structure. So I emphasize that family offices will have to change in the aftermath of COVID-19 for several reasons. And I might give more details in addition to the ones I mentioned very briefly in the article. So first of all, to be able to give you a perspective on what would change, we noticed over the last couple of years that the emphasis by family offices to be more structured, meaning they had some more interest in having governance, family constitution, separating management from ownership, and all these sort of measures. And even some of them went far to draft a very sophisticated blueprints in measuring risk and how risk should be addressed in various investments. So that's something that was new, I would say, 5 years ago, and in the aftermath of the financial crisis, which goes back to over a decade. In the last couple of years, that even have changed more, that it doesn't matter what's written and what are the structure or governance of a certain investment facility, so be it family office or institutional investor. What matters at the end of the day, do you really invest on what you were promised to invest in? Meaning, are you hedged for the risk you are supposed to hedge for? Are you as diversified as you aimed for? Are your investment goals met in reality, not in paper? So in the aftermath of COVID-19, what I envision is for family offices to stay away whatsoever from any intermediary and focus on capacity building, because information, knowledge would be the key going forward. And it's not cliche to say information and knowledge, because we see now real time how information provide no good in the middle of the crisis. It provides more noise than direction. That's exactly what's happening in the time of a crisis like COVID-19 and previously financial crisis, and prior to that, other social and political crises.
Investors are concerned that, like COVID-19, it could happen again, and most likely something will in the future. So in your perspective, what are some tips they can use to prepare for another event? this?
Well, before saying these steps, I need to emphasize over and over that our world have changed forever. It became irreversibly interconnected, complex. We are sharing the same ecosystem. You cannot immune yourself from what's happening uh, um, uh, within the neighborhood or in a distant country or government. It's not going to happen anytime soon. And don't confuse that with the sovereignty of each country right now imposing lockdowns measure and closing airports. They are still highly interconnected, but they are facing this for the first time, so they don't know how to address it. And in my humble opinion, that's not the way to address it. In a time of usually systemic risk crisis like this one, systemic risk is only increasing with the interconnection and with the flood of information that we are currently living in. You would think that the no-brainer solution would be to share synergies and knowledge to counter this crisis, as opposed to everyone operating in silos. So the reason we are still suffering from the implications and impacts of this crisis is that everyone is working in silos in my mind. So be it governments and companies. So back to your question, what investors should do, firstly, they have to get hold of the right information. And that doesn't mean by any means to get as much information as possible. In contrary, they need to get into the bottom of things to navigate the information that can be providing them directions as opposed to noise. That's on one hand. On the other hand, dealing with extraordinary or a totally new crisis means that we need to think out of the box and use new solutions. It will be no good to try over and over things that proved to be okay in the past. And I don't blame anyone. It's just like our brains are functioned in a way that we think on a one-way direction. That's the easiest way for us to think. It would take an extra effort and a mental effort to think in different directions, but that's the way it should be. And if I can tell you a quick example about this in analogy with COVID-19, it's just appealing to mention a healthcare example. One of the guidelines by WHO organization is to use cortisol to extend the life of patients who admit intensive care, because it expands the lung during the course of COVID-19. And a disclaimer, I'm a doctor, but not a physician, but you can check all the evidence-based research to verify what I am about to say. So cortisol is proven in some research to really extend the life, but there's no information, for example, and that's how you distinguish between noise and direction. There's no information what type of patient that was helped by administering cortisol. Are they elderly or younger? Are they suffering from comorbidities, et cetera, et cetera? What we know for a fact in the science space that cortisol is a stress hormone that is released by physical or emotional stress. And the interesting information that in elderly patients, this cortisol that their body release normally under different various stress stimulators never released, or their body never been able to get rid completely out of it, getting cortisol out of their system because of getting old as part of aging. So you can imagine if I am for investors to use that analogy, imagine that the doctor is the investor and they are dealing with the patients with COVID-19. It's a new virus, nobody addressed or treated before. And I'm using the weapon, which is cortisol, because it worked before, not knowing the information that is really already in the system of elderly. I am literally accelerating their death. So this is just oversimplification, but really new challenges requires new measures.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and perspective today. I'm really looking forward to hearing that further at the Empower event later this year, next month. So Dr. Rania Azmi, thank you so much again, and have a fantastic day.
You're very welcome. You too.